Hey, this is Kristin.
And this is Aaron. And this is the Drive Mode Show.
Yahoo!
What are we talking about? We're going to talk about cars.
We're going to talk about cars. Yes, we're going to talk about two specific cars and compare and contrast the two.
So we're talking about the Hyundai Sonata and Mazda 6.
That's right. Two similarly sized sedans and similarly priced as well. I've driven both of them recently, and while I liked them both, they definitely have some differences between the two.
Lots of differences. So
You've driven them both too, right?
Right. In the last year, I've driven both of them. Mazda 6, much longer ago, is probably been a full year since I drove the Mazda 6. Because I think that the 2020 came out right around this time last year. And then the Sonata was more recent. That was around January, I think.
Right. I think I drove it late last year. But the time is all just crunched together now.
Yeah, we kind of have like this 2 or 3 months where it's all just one giant long block. And most of the time you have no idea what day it is.
This time continuum, I have no idea. Yes, well, let's just say a few months back, I drove the Sonata in Phoenix. And then, in Phoenix? Yeah, I guess it was. And then I had the Mazda 6 just this past week. Now, from an exterior styling perspective, I think they both have beautiful lines. What I like about the Sonata is that the lasso that they've got coming around the taillights, I like that. And I like the chrome stripe that goes up the hood. And it goes from the lighting into the chrome stripe. Really, you can't even tell where one starts and one begins.
And I'm a huge fan of the Mazda 6 because it's a fairly old design at this point, but it's beautiful. It's one of those classic looks that never goes bad, right? So it always looks good. It's like a butternut squash of design, right? So it just doesn't go bad. It can sit on the counter forever. And it's that sinuous look that a lot of classic cars have. The classic Corvettes, the classic BMWs, the beautiful, just beautiful cars that we think about. They all have these same basic elements. And in the Mazda 6, it's just beautifully put together. You have the curvy front end, the flat nose, the curvy front end, and then that all kind of just flows into almost a Coke bottle, but not quite across the bodywork. It's just a beautiful look. And then the Mazda 6, of course, has that Skyactiv engine with just a wonderful feel. Just feels really good. And of course, it drives well because it's a Mazda. With the Hyundai has a more contemporary look, so it's a more modern today look to its design, and it's a great look. So it's more of a fastback sedan, so it's the sedan with the clipped deck lid, so it's a shorter deck, and it just has a wonderful that forward movement, which is what they're always aiming for in a car.
I thought they both had a very smooth ride. But the Mazda feels more powerful, and rightly so, because it has a bigger engine. It has two options for the engine.
It's a 40 or 50 horsepower difference. It's a pretty big difference.
Yeah, it is a pretty big difference. The Mazda in the signature model, which is the one that I had a turbocharged 2.5 liter four-cylinder with 250 horsepower. And the top of the line for the Hyundai Sonata is a turbocharged 1.6 liter with 180 horsepower. So it's got a little bit less horsepower, a little bit more torque than the base model Sonata, but still not as much power as the Mazda. And yesterday I drove the Mazda 6 through West Texas. I had to pass a couple times because I was on a one-lane road, lots and lots of space. There's plenty of space to pass, but the Mazda really got up to speed quickly and made the passes easily.
It's it's a difference between the two companies, what their approach is. So without getting too complex with what the engineering is, the Hyundai is aiming towards downsizing the engine and upsizing the power output per, right? So they're making the engine smaller, but raising the power output as the engine gets smaller. And they're pulling that off really well. Whereas Mazda has been using their Skyactiv system, which they developed in tune with Ford. So when Ford had partial ownership of Mazda, they developed what Ford now calls EcoBoost, and Mazda calls Skyactiv. And it's a high compression diesel style engine running gasoline. So the Mazda engine is very efficient because it's using high compression to burn more fuel, which is just a different approach to the same idea. You're trying to save fuel and produce more power per unit of fuel. And they've just got two separate approaches for doing so. And it's a interesting difference, just because engineering wise they have the same goal, two different paths to get there.
I think that's a really good point. And, you know, like you said, this particular Mazda 6, this is the generation that started in 2014. So they haven't updated the exterior looks very much, but the engine the engine continues to be that same steady Mazda feel. You know, it's really fun to drive. I was reading the Edmunds review this morning, and they're saying it really is a joy to drive, like as Mazda is. And I really felt that while I was driving it yesterday. I also agree with you on the looks. The Mazda 6, I love the snub nose of it. It kind of reminds me of a shark. You know, like I think Barracuda, when I look at it, it's got that incline, and the grill is beautiful. And you know that Soul Red Crystal Metallic's one of my very favorite colors. This particular sedan I had in the machine gray metallic, which was also really striking. It looks beautiful in pictures. It has a really nice metallic look.
I had it in Soul Red, but I had the Mazda 3 in that color. And I really like that gray. It's kind of a gunmetal look. It's a wonderful, really pretty, eye-catching color, though. It's a weird thing because it's not, you know, you think about it, you don't think of it as a color because it's basically a black and white mix, right? It's gray. But it's really pops, even though it should be dull, but it's jumping at you. And I think it's because of the shape of Mazda. The shape of the vehicle really likes that color.
Yes, I've watched some videos of Mazda and the way that they shape their car bodies with clay, and then the way they set up the painting is really, it's really significant the way they do it. It's definitely a little bit different than the ways some of the other manufacturers paint. And I agree with you. The lines on the car really help the color stand out. It almost looks like, it almost has like a, you know how iPhones have the beautify feature that make you look better in video?
Oh, right.
I think the Mazda sedans have that beautify filter on their cars.
We have some mutual friends on Instagram who probably overuse that.
The over-filtered.
One of the other things I noticed, though, is with the Hyundai, you have a little more practicality, the day-to-day practicality. I don't know what the dimensions are for you know, the actual numbers in cubic feet and stuff, but I feel that the trunk in the Hyundai was larger, and the back seats might be comparable, but I felt like there was more headroom in that Hyundai than there was in the Mazda, and I think that's mostly roofline shape. The Mazda has a little more aggressive rear pitch, so that may have been impacting that. But
I didn't notice that as much, but you're a lot taller than I am.
Yeah, 6'3", you kind of notice those things.
I just had the Hyundai Venue last week, their new crossover, and it feels completely different to me than the Palisade, which feels different from the Sonata, to your point.
Yeah, and whereas you can go from like a Mazda 3, so a little car, you can go from that car all the way into a CX-9, and you still have that same sporty, dynamic, and the same tight, again, they call it Skyactiv because it's a full vehicle technology, that same dynamic and stiff body structure that causes the vehicle to move in a sporty way, no matter the size of the vehicle. So they all feel very similar together to each other.
Now let's talk a little bit about the gauge cluster and the infotainment, because I think there are some significant differences between the two. And with the
Significance
Mazda
a good
6,
word.
significant differences, yes. What I loved about the Mazda 6 is their head-up display was very easy to see, and I like that it has the cruise control activates right on their head-up display, as well as the speed limit. So you can easily see what's the speed limit, what's your speed that you're doing right now. Makes it really easy to look at when you're driving. You don't have to look around much. And on the gauge cluster itself, I like the way it's laid out for the RPMs, the gas tank, and also your speedometer. It's all right there. Hyundai was similarly nicely laid out in the gauge cluster. Both of them have Bose stereo systems, Bose audio systems, and so they sound really good. But when it comes to controlling the audio, the Sonata definitely has the edge, and that's because personally, I really struggle with the controls of the command control knob in the Mazda.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of two of Mazda's things. I am glad first that they got away from that little flip-up head-up display, and now they're doing a proper one on the windscreen. But the audio controls for the hi-fi, the audio controls on that in a Mazda are always on that center console rather than up on the whatever it's called, the T-stack. Rather than up there, it's down here, and it gets bumped a lot. So whoever's in the passenger seat, they're going to hit it with their elbow. They're probably going to set something on it, whatever. It gets bumped a lot in that location. And then, like you were talking about the infotainment, I don't like command knob infotainment. It doesn't matter who makes it. I have yet to find one that's good. They're all horrible. There are beginning to be some exceptions, but most of that is because voice control is becoming a bigger and better part of infotainment. But I like Mazda's gauge cluster a lot.
I do too.
Very clear, easy to see. Everything is intuitive and exactly where and how you expect it to be in that cluster. So you're seeing exactly what you expect to see as every time you glance down. Just wonderfully, wonderfully done. But Mazda does not have as advanced a driver information system as does Hyundai. Hyundai has a much better, bigger, better, and more informative screen if you want to dig through those menus. So if you're into that, if you love digging for what's my average MPG, what's my this, that, or the other, whatever you're into doing, it is easier to pull more information from the Hyundai than it is from that Mazda. So, but if you're not into that, I guess that doesn't matter.
Well, I feel
Hyundai also has better turn-by-turn. That's the last point.
I agree.
What's displayed in that information screen and the turn-by-turn directions on the built-in navigation are better.
I agree. And with the Mazda in the infotainment system, the navigation screen, I could not for the life of me find the zoom and how to, how to zoom out and see different parts of the map. I could not get it to do what I wanted to do without looking at the manual and, looking into it a little bit more. The Sonata's screen is a lot more intuitive. It's a lot easier to use. And
I will point out, though, that Mazda has updated their infotainment. So in the new CX-30, you'll see that. That's where I've seen it most recently. But it's more of a tablet-style interface, so you have the pinch and the swipes. Which greatly fixes the problem you're talking about.
Yes, that is huge because I feel like, what we were talking about, that Mazda hadn't made many changes in the Mazda 6 since 2014. That's where they've lagged behind on the 6, and that's where the Sonata has the edge in terms of technology. They're way ahead on that side. But if Mazda takes that same infotainment that you have in the CX-30 and puts it into their sedans, it's going to leapfrog ahead.
Yeah, and I think we'll see that roll out over the next year or so. It'll hit the other sedans and then the crossovers as well. So I think we'll start to see that. But it is a point, and I think that the Mazda 6 at this point is ready for an update. So I really think we're going to see one, maybe the 2022 model year. We'll see one. So sometime next year they'll probably unveil it. And to stay competitive, they're going to have to.
I agree. I can't wait to see it. I really thought highly of both of these sedans. They have differences, but they're both a good value. You know, even top of the line, they're like $35,000. You can get both of them in beautiful colors. You know, and depending on your priority, if it's your infotainment, then you're going to want to go with the Sonata. You know, if you're more about the zoomy drive, you're going to want to go with the Mazda. That's right. And I think, honestly, I think you can't go wrong with either sedan. If you're in the market for a sedan that fits five comfortably, both are good choices. They're both similarly priced. I believe Hyundai's warranty is much longer, you know, if that's important to you. Hyundai and Kia both have stellar warranties, you know, so they protect you for a long time. 10 years, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it's difficult to name Hyundai and Kia and Mitsubishi. Those are the three companies that have the leading warranties across the board in automotive. There is nobody that matches that warranty, as far as I know, across the board. They might do it with an individual vehicle, but they don't do it across the board. So that's a big deal. I will also point out that both companies prioritize safety. So you will have high safety standards no matter which vehicle you choose.
I agree with that too. And more companies are realizing that the safety option, the driver assist features, should not be optional. And they're including them more and more. And I think that that's really important. You know, if we want to show that we care about safety on the road, you got to include it standard. The safety option shouldn't be optional.
Right. This has been Aaron.
This is Kristin.
And this was the Drive Mode Show.
Thanks for watching.
Right after you subscribe.